two racist police officers brazenly stopped and mocked a black man driving an old Jeep, trying to assert their authority completely unaware that he was their new chief. When the truth came to light, their faces turned pale. This is a story about the abuse of power, justice, and how a courageous leader dared to challenge and transform an entire system. But before we dive deeper into this story, don't forget to share where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss more gripping stories like this. Ethan Graham was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, yet his eyes always reflected firmness and determination. He had once been an outstanding police officer, respected by many and a role model within the force. However, after nearly 2 decades of service, Ethan made the difficult decision to leave, not because he no longer loved the profession, but because what he had witnessed broke his heart. The city where Ethan worked was one where police officers did not always adhere to the rules. Corruption had seeped into the decisions of those in power. As an officer with a strong sense of duty and integrity, Ethan could no longer bear it. He had seen too many of his colleagues misuse their authority to intimidate, abuse, and discriminate against innocent people. One of the most painful reasons for Ethan's resignation was the heartbreaking story of his younger sister. Olivia, also a police officer, faced discrimination within her workplace. She was ostracized by her colleagues and denied promotions simply because of her race and gender. When Ethan learned about this, he did everything in his power to protect his sister, but in the end, he had to witness his helplessness against the blind protection and cover-ups of the leadership. Having endured these injustices, Ethan left the force and began a new chapter of his life. He moved to the suburbs, seeking a peaceful life with his family. Yet, even though he left law enforcement behind, Ethan could never fully move on. The sense of failure, the feeling that he hadn't done enough to change the system, haunted him. 5 years passed, and one day, while Ethan was working as a manager at a private company, he received an unexpected call from the city. It was news of a major shakeup within the police department. You have been appointed as the city's chief of police. For the first time in years, Ethan felt an indescribable emotion. He couldn't believe that he was being called back to lead the very force he had walked away from. This was an opportunity he couldn't ignore, a chance to fulfill the mission that had burned in his heart all those years, to reform and rebuild trust in the police force. Although he felt a twinge of anxiety about the new challenge, Ethan knew this was more than a personal opportunity. It was a chance to change an entire system, to bring justice to people like his sister and those abandoned by the very institution meant to protect them. He decided to accept the position and return, not just for the job, but for the community and his loved ones who had been treated unfairly. Ethan understood that this new role would bring not only professional challenges, but also resistance from within the police force. Change is never easy, and there would certainly be those who didn't want it to happen. But Ethan couldn't turn back now. He knew all too well that if no one acted, nothing would ever change. Reform had to come from within. For Ethan, his mission wasn't just about solving problems within the department. It was a fight against everything he had witnessed during his time as a police officer. His goal wasn't only to reform justice, but also to restore trust and respect in the profession he had once served with all his heart. With determination and vision, Ethan stepped into a battle he knew wouldn't be easy. But he wasn't afraid. He had seen enough injustice to understand that there was only one path forward: to fight. While Ethan prepared for the challenging journey ahead as chief of police, elsewhere in the city, 2 young officers, Tom Edwards and Sam Carter, were busy basking in their self-satisfaction during a routine patrol. They weren't officers dedicated to justice or community protection. For them, the badge was merely a tool to flaunt authority and dominance. Tom, the older of the two, had nearly a decade in the force. He was tall with a condescending tone and a perpetually mocking smile. Despite his years of service, Tom wasn't interested in promotions or additional responsibilities. What he enjoyed most was the sense of control he wielded, especially when dealing with those he deemed weaker than himself. Sam, younger and less experienced, idolized Tom. Working with Tom made Sam feel powerful, and he eagerly followed his colleagues' lead in all his antics. Together, they frequently abused their authority, stopping citizens without cause. questioning them unnecessarily, and occasionally issuing threats just to stroke their egos. In their patrol area, Tom and Sam were notorious for their arrogance. Complaints from residents were not uncommon, but thanks to their connections within the department, they had never faced serious consequences. Public grievances were often dismissed or buried under falsified reports. One quiet evening, as Tom and Sam patrolled the suburban outskirts of the city, boredom weighed heavily on them. This part of the city, which they called the dead zone, had no real crime, no significant incidents, and rarely any emergency calls. For dedicated officers, a shift like this might signify peace in the city. But for Tom and Sam, it was intolerable monotony. "There's nothing to do out here," Sam complained, tapping the dashboard lightly with his foot. "How many times have we driven through this area without finding anything?" Tom glanced at Sam and laughed. "You've got to know how to make your fun, Sam. We don't need to wait for something to happen. We make it happen." As soon as he said this, they spotted an old, beat-up SUV cruising slowly down the road ahead. The car's paint was peeling, and its body was dented in several places. The driver, from a distance, appeared to be a middle-aged man who didn't seem to belong to the area. To Tom and Sam, this was the perfect target to break the monotony. "Look at that," Tom said, pointing at the SUV with an eager grin. "Looks like we've found some excitement for the night." Sam chuckled, leaning forward to get a better view. "That car looks like it just rolled out of a junkyard. And the driver, he doesn't live around here. Probably lost." Tom nodded, his grin widening. "Well, then we must help him find his way back to wherever he belongs. Right? All in the name of public safety." Tom turned on the patrol lights and swerved the car in front of the SUV, forcing it to brake abruptly. Tires screeched as the SUV came to a sudden halt, narrowly avoiding a collision with the police car. The sudden stop caused the SUV to skid slightly off the road and scrape against a metal guardrail. The sound of the impact echoed, but the vehicle remained intact. "Perfect," Tom said, stepping out of the patrol car. Sam followed, grinning as he adjusted his police belt, acting as though they had just completed a critical mission. The man in the SUV got out. It was Ethan Graham. He stood tall, his eyes calm but unyielding. His posture caught the two officers off guard for a moment, but they quickly masked their surprise with smug expressions. "Looks like it's going to be an eventful night," Tom said with a sneer. "So, what are you doing out here, buddy? Look at that car of yours. Doesn't seem like you belong around here, does it?" Sam, leaning against the patrol car, added with a mocking laugh. "Or maybe you're here for the best car of the year competition. If so, you're winning the Junkyard Jewel Award." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the two men, observing their every move. Anger simmered within him, but he knew he had to stay composed. This wasn't the first time he had faced men like them, and he knew it wasn't yet time to act. Tom stepped closer, his hand resting near his holster as if ready to draw his weapon. "You still haven't answered my question. What are you doing here? And what's in that car of yours? Pop the trunk for inspection," he demanded. Sam leaned casually against the patrol car, smirking. "Bet this guy doesn't even have the proper paperwork. We might need to take him downtown." Ethan took a deep breath, holding his composure. He knew that letting anger take control would only make things worse. Looking Tom straight in the eye, he said in a calm, steady voice, "You have no right to do this. This is an abuse of power." Tom burst into laughter. "Abuse of power? Come on, buddy. We're just doing our job. If you don't like it, you can file a complaint." "Oh wait, I bet that never works. Does it?" Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, the humiliation cutting deep. But instead of retaliating, he allowed a small smile to play on his lips. "You'll find out who I am soon enough," he replied. The story had only just begun, and Tom and Sam had no idea that the man they had mocked would soon become their worst nightmare. "Are you going to tell us what you're doing here?" Tom continued, his tone sharp yet tinged with mockery. He stood a short distance from Ethan, his eyes scrutinizing every movement. Sam, still leaning against the patrol car, occasionally glanced at his partner before shifting his gaze back to Ethan, his face full of arrogance. Ethan stood his ground, unmoving. He was no stranger to situations like this in the past. Seeing the smug attitudes of these two young officers, he didn't need to guess that they were trying to provoke him. But Ethan knew that if he reacted strongly or showed anger, he would fall right into the trap they were setting. "Look at that car, Sam," Tom said loudly, making sure Ethan could hear. "I don't think I've ever seen a worse-looking vehicle. It probably wouldn't even pass an emissions test. A car like this is a hazard on the road." Sam burst into laughter. "Bet he uses it for scavenging old junk. Or wait, do you think he lives in it?" Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing but his demeanor remaining calm. "I don't think your comments have anything to do with law enforcement. Instead of standing here making jokes, you should be doing your job," he said, his voice steady and clear. Sam hesitated briefly at the response, but Tom, unwilling to be challenged, immediately stepped closer, nearly face to face with Ethan. "Listen, buddy, I don't think you're in a position to tell us how to do our job. And if I'm not mistaken, you still haven't answered my question. What are you doing here? Or are you just refusing to let us inspect your car?" Ethan met Tom's gaze directly, his eyes unwavering. "You have no right to search my car without probable cause. This is an abuse of power." Ethan's words only added fuel to the fire. Tom laughed loudly, but his smile held no friendliness. "Abuse of power? Do you think we need a reason to do our job? Hey, Sam, this guy must be new to how things work around here." Sam shrugged and moved toward Ethan's SUV, pretending to inspect it. He kicked the tires, peered through the windows, and then turned to Ethan with a defiant smirk. "You're not hiding anything illegal in here, are you?" "Hey, Tom, I think we should check the trunk just to be safe." Ethan sighed, his gaze sharpening while his tone remained composed. "You stopped me without cause, and now you want to search my car without any justification. Do you think this is how law enforcement should work?" Sam let out a loud laugh, turning to Tom. "Did you hear that, Tom? The guy thinks he's in a law class." Tom shrugged, stepping closer to the SUV and pointing at it. "Listen here, buddy. This is our turf. We decide who belongs here and who doesn't. And clearly, this car and you don't belong." Without waiting for any further protest, Sam opened the SUV's door and began rifling through the backseat. Ethan's personal belongings, papers, and a few notebooks were carelessly lifted and tossed aside. A gym bag was pulled out, and Sam pretended to thoroughly search it as though expecting to find something illegal. "Disappointing," Sam said with a mocking tone. "I was hoping for at least a gun or maybe a bag of cash. But all we've got here are some old clothes and crumpled papers." Tom, still standing near Ethan, laughed loudly and looked him straight in the eye. "You seem confident. I bet you think you're smarter than us. But let me remind you, you're here on our streets and we make the rules." Ethan didn't move, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on Sam, who continued to toss his belongings around. He wanted to react, to put an end to this abuse of power, but he knew any action on his part would only be used against him. Sam laughed again as he pulled a folder from the back seat. "Oh, what's this? Work files? Someone thinks they're important, but I doubt anyone driving a car like this holds any meaningful position." Tom chimed in, "Probably one of those people who likes to pretend they're professional. You know, someone with a rusty exterior trying to look polished on the inside." Sam dropped the folder on the ground and continued rummaging through the trunk while Tom stared Ethan down. "Hey, buddy, do you think this car deserves to be on the road? It doesn't even look safe enough for backcountry driving." Ethan, though holding back his emotions for far too long, remained calm. His voice was firm yet unwavering. "You're overstepping. This is my personal property, and you have no right to continue searching it." Ethan's statement caused Sam to pause briefly, but instead of recognizing his mistake, Sam turned to Tom and shrugged. "Looks like the guy doesn't want us touching his stuff. Maybe we should take him down to the station and see how he explains himself to the higher-ups." Ethan took a step forward, his tall stature suddenly making both officers feel the weight of his presence. "I'm not going anywhere, and you should stop what you're doing. Your actions are not just an abuse of power, they're a blatant violation of my rights. If you don't have a legitimate cause, You'd better stop. Tom, though trying to maintain his smug expression, was unsettled by Ethan's confidence, but he wasn't ready to admit fault. All right, Sam, I think we've seen enough. Nothing's interesting here. Sam stepped back, throwing the folder into the trunk and slamming it shut. What a waste of time, he muttered in frustration. I hope we don't see you around here again, buddy. As Tom and Sam returned to their patrol car, they continued to mock Ethan. Good luck finding your way home, pal. Next time, don't expect to get off this easy. The patrol car rolled away, leaving Ethan standing by the side of the road. His SUV rummaged through, his belongings disordered, and his dignity challenged. Yet he didn't let anger take control. Ethan stood there for a moment, breathing deeply to regain his composure. In his mind, one thought was clearer than ever. This is why I have to go back to the force. This is exactly what needs to change. As the patrol car's lights faded into the distance, Ethan continued reorganizing his belongings. However, before Tom and Sam could drive too far, he raised his head and called out in a calm yet ominous tone, "Don't worry, gentlemen. By tomorrow morning, you'll know exactly who I am." Tom and Sam heard the remark, prompting them to pause briefly. Sam turned to Tom, raising an eyebrow. What did he just say? Sounded like a threat. Tom smirked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Just some arrogant guy. Probably thinks he's someone important. Sam shrugged, feigning indifference. Maybe he thinks he's a lawyer or something. Either way, I'm not worried. If he wants to file a complaint, we've got the connections to handle it. Tom nodded, starting the car and driving off. Exactly. People like him aren't worth our time. The city police department was unusually lively that day. News of the appointment of a new chief had spread quickly. Officers gathered in small groups, speculating about the incoming boss they had yet to meet. Some hoped for positive changes, while others worried about what the future might hold. Tom and Sam strolled into the station, still carrying their usual air of confidence. They were blissfully unaware of the significant event that was about to unfold. I hear we're getting a new boss today, Sam said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Hope he's not the micromanaging type. Tom chuckled. Whoever it is, it won't make a difference to us. We know how to do our jobs. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed to life. All personnel, please assemble in the main hall in 10 minutes to welcome the new chief of police. Officers began making their way toward the hall. Tom and Sam followed leisurely, continuing their light-hearted banter. At precisely 9 a.m., all personnel gathered in the main hall. The room fell silent as officers filled the space, their curious eyes fixed on the stage where a microphone stood ready. The faint murmurs faded as the main doors swung open. Ethan stepped in, his posture upright, his gaze sharp, and his uniform immaculate, exuding the aura of a true leader. All eyes in the room immediately turned to Ethan. Some officers appeared impressed by his commanding presence, while others began to feel a creeping sense of unease as they recognized the authority emanating from the new chief. Tom and Sam, standing in a corner of the room, froze in disbelief when they saw Ethan. For a moment, they couldn't trust their eyes. Sam leaned toward Tom, whispering, "No way. That's him, the guy from last night." Tom swallowed hard, cold sweat trickling down his temple. Damn it, we're in serious trouble now. Ethan ascended the podium, his eyes scanning the room, briefly pausing on the corner where Tom and Sam stood. Maintaining absolute composure, he began speaking with a voice that was clear and commanding, resonating throughout the hall. "Good morning. My name is Ethan Graham, your new chief of police. It is an honor to stand here today, but I bring with me not just a title, but an important mission, one that I believe is not mine alone, but belongs to all of us." He paused briefly, letting his words settle in the air. The police force is not merely a symbol of authority. It is a symbol of trust, responsibility, and justice. But I'm not naive enough to think that these values have always been upheld. I know that certain behaviors have tarnished our image in the eyes of the public. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, his sharp eyes seemingly piercing through each individual. Abuse of power, discrimination, and irresponsibility will not be tolerated under my leadership. I am committed to ensuring that every member of this force, from the highest rank to the lowest, will be held accountable for their actions. No exceptions. The room fell into a deafening silence. Everyone felt the weight of Ethan's words. Honest officers began to feel a glimmer of hope, while those with past misdeeds, like Tom and Sam, started to feel the pressure bearing down on them. Ethan continued, I have heard about the misconduct within our ranks. I know some have forgotten that this badge is not a personal privilege, but a responsibility to the community. Let me make it clear. Anyone who disrespects this responsibility will face the consequences. Once again, Ethan's gaze landed on Tom and Sam, though he didn't call them out by name. Both men felt as though his words were aimed directly at them. Starting today, there will be changes, Ethan announced. I urge all of you to prepare yourselves, because I am not here to maintain the status quo. I am here to improve it. Ending his speech, Ethan stepped down from the podium. He didn't look back at Tom and Sam, but both knew that he had them in mind. As the room began to empty, murmurs of speculation filled the air. Some officers felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, knowing that the new chief meant business, and apprehension about the changes Ethan had hinted at, while others worried about facing the repercussions of their past behavior. Tom and Sam lingered in a corner, both uncharacteristically silent. Sam was the first to break the quiet. What do you think he's going to do to us? Tom shook his head, unsure of how to respond. I don't know, but one thing's for sure. We can't let him gain the upper hand. Tom and Sam left the meeting room in prolonged silence. Ethan's words still echoed in their minds, each sentence cutting deep into their once confident demeanor. They couldn't deny the tension now weighing heavily on them from the very moment Ethan had stepped into the room. They had sensed something was off. But when he walked up to the podium and introduced himself as the new chief, the realization hit them like a lightning bolt. He was the man they had stopped and mocked the night before. All morning, Tom and Sam tried to avoid crossing paths with Ethan, yet every step they took in the station felt as though his eyes were following them. Even though Ethan hadn't said a word since the meeting, his presence alone, the calm intensity in his gaze, and the way he observed everything around him, made the atmosphere in the station palpably tense. During lunch, as they sat in the corner of the break room trying to keep their nerves in check, the door suddenly opened. Ethan walked in, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the crowded room. Though he didn't directly look at Tom and Sam, both of them felt an invisible weight pressing down on them. He's looking for us. I'm sure of it, Sam whispered. Stay calm, Tom replied, trying to mask his unease. But his hands gripped the edge of his chair tightly. He can't do anything right now. We just have to wait and see what he does next. As Ethan left the room, Sam turned to Tom. Did you notice? He doesn't even need to say anything. Just that look alone is enough to tell us what he wants. Tom nodded grimly. Exactly. And that's what's terrifying. He knows we're scared, and he wants us to feel it. The rest of the day, Tom and Sam could hardly focus on their duties. They constantly felt as if Ethan was watching their every move. Their colleagues didn't seem to notice their discomfort. But for Tom and Sam, every passing hour felt like mental torture. We need to talk to him, Sam said as they left the station at the end of the day. Apologize or beg for forgiveness, something. We can't let this drag on. Tom shook his head. I'm not sure that's a good idea. We need time to think, to figure out what he's planning before we make a move. Sam sighed, clearly dissatisfied with the response. Time isn't on our side, Tom. He could act at any moment, and I don't want to wait for that to happen. Tom and Sam knew it was only a matter of time before Ethan acted, but they hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Just hours after lunch, a message appeared on both their phones, Edwards and Carter. Report to the chief's office immediately. Sam stared at his screen, his heart pounding. This is going to end badly. Tom tried to keep his composure, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. We don't have a choice. Let's go. It's best to face him and hope he just wants to issue a warning. The heavy click of the office door closing behind them felt like a death knell. The air in the room seemed stifling. Ethan sat behind his desk, his cold gaze tracking their every movement. Sit down, Ethan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make both men feel the pressure bearing down on them. Tom and Sam sat down, neither daring to speak first. Ethan slowly pulled a file from his desk drawer, placed it on the desk, and opened it. Inside were reports and photographs, and most notably, footage from the patrol car's dashboard camera the night before. First, Ethan began, his eyes drilling into theirs. "I want to hear from you. Explain to me what you were doing on patrol last night." Tom and Sam exchanged glances, clearly searching for a way to justify their actions. But under Ethan's stern gaze, every lie seemed to get stuck in their throats. "What do you think Ethan should do in this situation as a leader? Would you punish them strictly to set an example, or give them a chance to redeem themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments below." Tom tried to keep his voice steady. "Sir, we were just doing our job. We noticed a suspicious vehicle in the area and wanted to ensure everything was safe." "Safe," Ethan repeated, emphasizing the word. "Stopping a car without cause, forcing the driver off the road, and searching personal property without any grounds. Is that how you define safe?" Sam spoke up, his voice tinged with pleading. "Chief, we didn't mean any harm. We just thought that the vehicle didn't belong in the area. We wanted to make sure everything was okay." Ethan leaned forward, his tone colder than ever. "You thought your authority gave you the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't? You thought this badge was a tool to enforce your personal biases?" He slid a printed image from the file across the desk toward them. It was a still from the patrol car footage, clearly showing Tom and Sam forcing Ethan's SUV to the side of the road, followed by their actions of rummaging through his belongings. "You don't need to explain further," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "I've seen the video, read the witness reports, and experienced firsthand how you treated me, not as your chief, but as an ordinary citizen." Ethan stood, his gaze stern and unforgiving. "What you did wasn't just irresponsible, it was an abuse of power. It was a violation of privacy and a threat to the safety of a citizen." Sam hung his head, unable to say a word. Tom, still trying to justify their actions, spoke with a voice that had started to falter. "Chief, we honestly didn't know. We didn't know it was you." Ethan let out a faint, humorless laugh, his eyes sharp as knives. "And if I wasn't your new chief, what then? Would you have mocked me more? Pressed me further? Or did you think no one would ever hold you accountable?" Ethan turned to his seat, facing them squarely. "Let me remind you, this badge does not grant you the freedom to act as you please. It is a symbol of responsibility, a responsibility to the citizens you swore to protect, not to oppress." As silence engulfed the office, Ethan looked deeply into the anxious eyes of Tom and Sam. Instead of continuing his interrogation, Ethan leaned back in his chair and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Do you know why I took this job? Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, I was an idealistic young police officer. I joined the force not just for the stability of a job, but because I believed I could make a difference. To me, the police badge wasn't just a symbol of authority. It was a reminder of my responsibility to the community. I worked tirelessly to protect the vulnerable and to fight against injustice. During the early years of my career, I tried my best to live up to the values I believed in. I once saved a family from a fire, stood up for an immigrant being discriminated against, and helped an orphan boy reunite with his family. These moments made me proud of my profession. But then I began to realize that not everyone in the force shared those ideals. The whispers behind my back, the disdainful looks aimed at those who were different, and decisions tainted by prejudice began to reveal the darker side of the organization I served. The turning point in my journey came when my sister Lisa joined the police force. Lisa was intelligent, strong, and shared my ideals. However, she wasn't treated with the respect she deserved. As a woman of color in law enforcement, she became the target of ridicule and discrimination from the very colleagues she trusted. I remember one evening vividly. Lisa came home after her shift, her eyes red with anger and frustration. She told me about being deliberately excluded from important assignments, mocked for being told women don't belong in this field, and even falsely accused of mistakes she hadn't made. I fought for my sister. I reported these incidents to our superiors, but everything was swept under the rug. "We don't want to disrupt the team," was the only response I received. In the end, Lisa couldn't bear the pressure and left the force, carrying with her the pain and injustice she endured. Watching my inability to protect my sister crushed me. I realized that the ideals I had once believed in had been corrupted by people who abused their power for personal gain. After a long struggle with myself, I decided to leave the force. I moved to the suburbs to live a quiet life with my family, trying to forget the injustices I had witnessed. But the peace didn't last. One day, I heard about an incident in the city. A young man was stopped by the police and shot simply because he didn't exit his vehicle quickly enough. Reading about it, I realized that the abuses of power I had witnessed hadn't just continued, they had grown worse. A conversation with Lisa changed everything. "You always said we have to fight for justice," she said. "But if we give up, who will do it?" Her words struck a chord in me. I realized that if I wanted change, I couldn't stay away. I had to return, not as an ordinary officer, but as someone who could change the system from within. When the city offered me the position of chief of police, I knew it was my chance to fulfill the mission I had carried in my heart for so long. Ethan finished his story, his eyes now filled not with anger, but with unyielding determination. "I didn't come back for power or prestige. I came back because I refused to let what happened to my sister and to this community happen again. And I will not tolerate anyone using this badge for personal gain." Tom and Sam lowered their heads, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. They began to realize that the man standing before them wasn't just a police chief. He was someone carrying a powerful story and a profound mission. Ethan stood, his piercing eyes still fixed on them. "You think what you did last night doesn't matter, but I'm here to remind you that every action has consequences, and I will make sure those consequences happen." He set the file down on the desk, closing it with a decisive click. "You've lost not only my trust but the trust of this community, and I cannot and will not tolerate that." Tom and Sam were speechless. They understood that every avenue for excuses had been shut. Ethan knew everything, and he had no intention of forgiving them. "Effective immediately. I am suspending both of you from duty," Ethan declared firmly. "You will surrender your badges and weapons and await further notice. I will also forward this report to the Oversight Committee to ensure your actions are thoroughly investigated." Sam opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan raised his hand to silence him. "I don't want to hear any excuses. Your actions have spoken louder than any words. Leave my office now." Tom and Sam left Ethan's office after the confrontation, but they were far from calm. Ethan's sharp words felt like knives cutting into their minds. Back at their desks, they exchanged looks but couldn't find the words to speak. Both knew that their worst days had yet to begin. Less than 24 hours later, Ethan called an emergency internal meeting. All personnel were required to attend, including Tom and Sam. The atmosphere at the police station was tense as everyone gathered, wondering what was about to unfold. Ethan entered the room, his presence commanding and his gaze unwavering. He wasted no time getting to the point. "Good morning. I made it very clear during my first meeting that I would not tolerate any actions that damage the integrity of this police force. Today, I must make a decision that I hope will serve as a lesson for all of us." He turned toward Tom and Sam, who were seated at the back of the room, their faces visibly uneasy. Tom Edwards and Sam Carter stepped forward. All eyes in the room turned to them. Tom and Sam stood, walking slowly to the front as if each step carried the weight of their impending fate. The room was so quiet that their heavy breaths could be heard. As they stood before Ethan, he looked directly at them, his voice clear and resolute. "Last night, after reviewing evidence from the patrol car cameras and witness statements, I made my decision." Ethan paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "Your actions not only violated departmental policy, but they also shattered the community's trust in this force. I cannot and will not tolerate that." He pulled out 2 documents from his pocket and placed them on the table. "You are both hereby terminated, effective immediately. Your badges, weapons, and all privileges are revoked. Furthermore, I will ensure that your misconduct is recorded in your files, making you ineligible to work in any law enforcement agency again." The room fell into stunned silence. Tom and Sam were frozen in disbelief. Sam tried to protest, his voice trembling. "Chief, we didn't mean to." Ethan raised a hand, cutting him off. "There is no justification for your actions. This isn't just a personal mistake. It's a betrayal of the responsibilities you were entrusted with. You made this community feel fear instead of protection." Taking a deep breath, Ethan's tone grew heavier but remained firm. "I once believed in this badge. I saw its meaning as a symbol of justice and trust. But your behavior has tarnished everything this badge represents, and I cannot forgive that." His gaze locked onto theirs, emphasizing every word. "Your actions were not just irresponsible, they were a betrayal to the community, to your colleagues, and to the very ideals of this profession." Tom bowed his head, his hands trembling. Sam stood motionless, his face pale. Both knew there was nothing more to say. Ethan's final words marked the end of their careers. As Tom and Sam left the meeting room, the silence lingered. Their colleagues, though shocked, said nothing. Some nodded in agreement with Ethan's decision, while others took it as a stark warning that misconduct would no longer go unpunished. Ethan turned to address the room. "I did not do this to assert power. I did this out of responsibility to the community and this force. We must do better. We must be people the public can trust. And if anyone here is unwilling to meet that standard, they have no place in this team." His words were met with silent acknowledgement. Some officers began reflecting on their actions, while others felt a renewed hope that meaningful change had finally begun. Tom and Sam left the police station with heavy hearts. Ethan's final words still echoed in their minds like an inescapable sentence. As they walked down the corridor, they felt the eyes of their colleagues on them, not with pity, but with disdain and even a hint of satisfaction. News of Tom and Sam's dismissal quickly spread beyond the station, becoming a hot topic in local media. Within hours, headlines like "Two officers fired for abuse of power" and "New police chief enforces justice, a lesson for the force" appeared everywhere, accompanied by photos of Tom and Sam in uniform. Public opinion was far from kind, with social media posts and comments under news articles, and even casual discussions at coffee shops zeroed in on the pair's failure. Tom and Sam quickly became symbols of corruption and abuse of power within law enforcement. Tom, once proud of his position in the police force, now faced the harsh reality that no agency wanted to hire him. Each time he applied for a job, his name was tainted by infamy. Companies rejected his applications outright, and the few interviews he managed to secure ended awkwardly in silence. Sam fared even worse. Not only had he lost his job, but also his self-confidence. The public criticism and ridicule left him depressed. In the months that followed, he rarely left his small apartment, living in shame and bitterness. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Sam said during one of his rare conversations with Tom. "We were just doing what everyone else does. Why did it all fall on us?" Tom sighed, saying nothing. He knew that making excuses would only make things worse. Deep down, he realized Ethan had been right. Their actions were indefensible, and the consequences were unavoidable. Meanwhile, at the police station, Ethan began implementing the changes he had promised. He organized regular ethics training sessions, emphasizing the importance of respecting citizens and enforcing the law with transparency. These discussions delved into not just the legalities of policing, but also how to treat communities, especially marginalized groups often overlooked or mistreated. "We're not just law enforcers," Ethan said during one training session. "We are protectors. We are responsible for every action we take. And if we fail to uphold that responsibility, we do not deserve this badge." Ethan's leadership sparked a wave of transformation. Initially, some officers were nervous, fearing that their past mistakes might come to light. But over time, honest and dedicated officers began to feel hopeful. They realized Ethan wasn't there for a witch hunt, but to rebuild trust within the force. The story of Tom and Sam became a lesson not just for the police department, but also for the community. Other officers recognized that abuse of power would no longer be ignored or tolerated. Some changed their ways, becoming more mindful of their actions. The community, though still skeptical, started noticing small but meaningful changes in how the police approached and addressed issues. One resident who had been harassed by Tom and Sam spoke out. "I didn't think this would happen, but now I have hope that the police here can truly change." Over time, Tom and Sam faded from the public eye. However, the stains on their reputations never disappeared. Each time they sought new opportunities, their names resurfaced in old articles, reminding them of their past mistakes. Tom tried to rebuild his life through small menial jobs, but each day he grappled with the bitterness of what he had lost. Sam, unable to cope with reality, withdrew into isolation, cutting himself off from the world. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't stop. He continued building a police force that prioritized the community, aiming not just to enforce the law but also to restore trust. He believed that every small change contributed to creating a better environment. Tom and Sam weren't the only ones to make mistakes, Ethan said in a meeting, but they are the clearest example of why we cannot keep repeating them. As the police department settled into its new normal following Ethan's sweeping changes, he refused to let himself rest. He knew that firing Tom and Sam was only the first step in a long journey toward reform. Ethan understood that addressing individual misconduct without tackling systemic issues would lead to only temporary progress. Ethan began hosting regular meetings with higher-ups and community representatives. He listened to feedback from all sides, not just from within the force, but also from those who had suffered under abusive policing. These candid discussions gave Ethan valuable insights into what needed to change and how to implement those changes. A strong police force does not make people afraid, Ethan said during one meeting. It makes people feel safe. He focused on creating new policies to ensure transparency in police operations. Patrol procedures were revised with strict oversight through mandatory reports and camera recordings. Ethan also championed the establishment of an independent community oversight committee to ensure that misconduct would be addressed openly and fairly. One of Ethan's most significant reforms was introducing a mandatory training program for all recruits. This program emphasized not just the enforcement of laws, but also respect for human rights, humane conflict resolution, and the elimination of personal biases. Ethan often worked longer hours than anyone else, spending countless evenings reviewing reports, meeting with community members, and even participating directly in training sessions. One officer once asked him, "Chief, why don't you take a break? You've already done so much." Ethan simply smiled. "I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing it for the people who need us. If we don't change, who will?" Gradually, Ethan's efforts began to bear fruit. Reports of misconduct dropped significantly, and relationships between the police and the community improved. Even those who had doubted the police force started to feel a renewed sense of hope. A woman who had once been a victim of police discrimination spoke at a community meeting. "I never thought I'd trust the police again, but thanks to Ethan, I've seen changes. I believe we're heading in the right direction." In a local TV interview, Ethan was asked about his determination to reform the police force. "Change starts with leadership," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "We can't expect a system to fix itself if those at the top aren't willing to confront the toughest issues. I'm not perfect, and I don't expect everyone to change overnight. But I believe that if we take small steps and stay committed to our community, we can create a better future." He paused, looking directly into the camera. The police force isn't a symbol of power. It must be a symbol of trust. And if we can't achieve that, then we don't deserve the badges we wear. As the interview ended, Ethan stepped out of the studio. Outside, the sunlight bathed the city. He knew the journey ahead was still long, but the first steps had been taken. Most importantly, he wasn't alone. He had honest colleagues, a supportive community, and an unwavering belief that change was possible. Ethan's story wasn't just about punishing misconduct, but also about hope, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for what's right. He proved that no matter how difficult the path, reform is achievable with the right leadership and relentless determination. If you were Ethan, how would you tackle these challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends. And subscribe to the channel for more meaningful content. Thank you for watching. and see you in the next video.